Is your day going fine so far, aside from having to talk to journalists?
It's going great. I can't complain. It's July 1st, and here we are being able to do most things that we weren't able to do a year ago. So I can't complain.
Well, wasting no time with the compliments here. McCartney 321, I'm a fan. I didn't know that this was in production. So it's kind of like you get the press release and you go, how did they keep this off the radar? How long was it from filming it to announcing it? Do you remember?
Oh, yes, very much so. We, from filming it, from the original concept to filming, or from filming to announcing?
I guess to clarify, some things get announced before they're done. Some things get announced after they're done. Some things are announced in the middle of production. Some things are just a 2-minute EPK kind of pitch to get the funding to make it. I have no idea, except that obviously McCartney 3 was a concept in existence when you knew that this was being made.
Yeah, Rick and I are old friends, and we had been talking about doing something together right after Laurel Canyon. He was in Hawaii, and we were sort of saying, wouldn't it be fun to do something together? Mm-hmm. And if it was sort of like if you had a short list of people who were well known, but you could tell and a different story about them, sort of reveal some things that were really interesting, especially about somebody like Paul. So we had a short list. We both decided, wouldn't it be great to do something on Paul McCartney? And I said, like Aaron Rodgers, that Hail Mary pass at the end of the game is unlikely to get caught, but what the heck? You never know, because timing is everything. And
right.
And Rick's and my focus was on Paul the musician. We didn't want to do a Beatles doc. We didn't want to do sort of like a fanboy Beatlemania doc. We really wanted to focus on the bass player, that guy who made that first McCartney record all by himself. What a musician. What an incredible musician. So we reached out to Scott Roger, who was wonderful. It's Paul's manager, and said, sure, I'll ask him. He doesn't do a lot. I know. And Paul loved the idea. Talked to Rick and said, sounds great. Now, I'm only here for a couple of weeks in New York, so
right.
Then we shoot in 3 weeks. And you can imagine, you've covered a lot of, creators and a lot of people who've made things. This thing happened so fast. It was either going to happen very fast or wasn't going to happen.
Right.
So, and during COVID, of course, in August, in shooting in New York and the Hamptons. So we, I didn't even go to the shoot because of COVID. It was Rick and Paul in the studio. And, we shot for 15 hours and were able to get some material that is really going to surprise people. It's really refreshing. It's also done in a different way. This is not a slick documentary. This is a two giants in the music industry sitting and talking about music and about how things came about and the choices that were made. And it's really interesting from that standpoint. And that's what I think people will find unique. People who are really into the Beatles will like it because there's new information. People who are learning about the Beatles in terms of, say, a younger generation,
right,
knows so many of these songs. And Paul is so interesting when he's describing think if you and I could have been there and we were saying, so Wolfgang, when you were writing Marriage of Figaro, what were you thinking about? Imagine being in a place where a guy who of our generation, to say that George Gershwin, when you wrote Someone to Watch Over Me 100 years ago, what was that like? And we have this unique perspective, and a guy like Rick can pull out information that I might not normally ask.
Yes.
You know
Yes,
what
he
I mean?
can. Yeah, well, to cut you off right there, you are so good at what you do that you answered 3 or 4 different things that I was going to ask you in there. One of the things I was going to ask was, if you watch closely, you notice that the camera is actually really far from Rick and Paul. And that led me to 2 conclusions. One, you wanted to keep the cameras away so it felt organic and you didn't want to spook them. And the other thing is, it was filmed during COVID. You helped answer that part of the equation.
Well, but also, isn't there though, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it felt to me that it was an incredibly intimate conversation.
Yeah, well, adding to that, one of the things that blows me away about this, and actually, before I give that compliment, I came into watching this as a little bit of a skeptic, going, love the Beatles, love Paul, but I've heard all the Howard Stern interviews. What is Paul McCartney gonna say that I haven't heard him say before? And within a minute, there's something and go, oh, okay. And then you see the photos of him and John playing guitar and the family photos of the McCartneys, and you go, okay, they got a bunch of stuff here that I haven't seen before, heard before, etc. But in the case of Rick, I may or may not have notes in front of me. When you're watching Rick, there's no notes that are visible. That is improv, and he's such a natural interviewer, and he asks things to Paul that you or I wouldn't be able to do because we don't have that clout, to say the least.
Well, he has such a different insight because I've been in the studio with Rick. He's somebody you want to talk to. You're comfortable talking to him. He's incredibly knowledgeable. Look, we interviewed him for the Johnny Cash doc I did.
Mm-hmm.
And what he said was so important for the story because of how articulate he is. You don't necessarily think that a guy who's going to spend all his life in the studio is going to be able to express himself in the way he does. And obviously you've heard his, podcast that he's done with Malcolm and stuff like that. He was talking about, in our Cash doc, one of the best quotes we had in the entire thing is Rick saying that Johnny would inhabit a song. And I love that. That's not a term that most people are going to use. A producer would do that. And so with that sensibility, he could talk to Paul and talk about how the harmonies came together and wow, you've got 2 different songs going on here. I don't know if you've seen all 6.
I saw the first 2, and I know the exact part you're talking about without spoiling anything. The While My Guitar Gently Weeps, of the many, many times I've heard that song, you actually hear him, vocal improvising on top of that, and you go, wow, that is 2 songs right there. Yeah, wow, yeah, what a telling thing.
It's crazy, and it's look, people in the industry have known that Paul is a phenomenal bass player.
Yes.
He's phenomenal, and that is so rarely discussed. I think that's perhaps one of the things that appealed to Paul, because we said the first thing out of our mouth was we want to focus on Paul McCartney, the musician, the bass player. And yes, it's so important to the sound of that band, critically important. And so what's also fun about this is obviously when you get the master tapes from Abbey Road, and the first time they've left there, I suppose, since the 60s. And what's really fun is having Paul listen back, isn't it? And you sort of, you're a voyeur watching him say, oh, I didn't remember that. Or is that me playing guitar on that? Or, oh, that's interesting. I mean, that was just fascinating. I mean, for me, as if I hadn't been working on it, I would be glued hearing those kinds of stories,
The opening scene of the first episode, usually when you do a lot of interviews with people, you have to go spoiler alert, but then again, hey, the Beatles happened a lot of years ago. There's a chance that the people might have read some of this stuff or heard these songs before. But the opening scene, when you see him doing air guitar miming to what John Lennon was actually playing, because Rick pushes the levels up, it's one of these things where I will never hear these songs the same way again, all in a positive light, of course. Is it Penny Lane, the part where he talks about how the orchestra inspires that and how the trumpet player had to kind of spend the rest of his life living up to that?
Well, that was the piccolo trumpet. And
Yeah.
I mean, they had incredible musicians play on those records. Those George Martin, who is a absolutely vital part of the those recordings, and even Paul's solo work, Live and Let Die, and Paul, knows Rick is a producer, right? So that conversation, when they're talking about George, and sometimes you're taking a double take, whether they're talking about George Harrison or George Martin, but Martin was able to add that access and that degree of sophistication, whether it was an arrangement of the harpsichord on In My Life, or whether it was, adding strings to, I'm trying to remember what the first song, I think it was Yesterday, that
Sounds
it was
right.
the first time they used strings, and Paul's initial reaction is, oh, I don't know about that, and then of course, George Martin says, well, let's see what it sounds like. And then of course, Paul falls in love with it. And that suddenly is so important in expanding this band, who's no longer playing live, becomes this brilliant studio band, because anything goes. They'll try anything, and they weren't afraid to fail. That's super interesting when you really, that's one of the things that comes out of this, is that, well, if it worked, great. If it didn't work, no problem. We're fine. And what, we have 1 hour to record it, okay. And that song is still around 65 years later. You recorded in 1 hour. That's like nuts.
And,
right?
and there's in general a lot of happy accidents you hear related to these songs, about the Fela Kuti part, about why he played drums on this song, etc. So I don't want to spoil too much, except to say you set the bar about here with McCartney, and I think even the most diehard of Beatles fans will learn new things that they didn't know. So congratulations on all that. And do you mind if I ask you about other projects?
Not at all. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, because it's this long filmography that you have of acclaimed projects. Most people, if they made this one McCartney thing their whole life, and they'd be sitting at the bar and they'd be like, I made a thing on McCartney. And then in your case with Laurel Canyon, with Johnny Cash, with Glenn Campbell, it's just thing after thing after thing that is totally up my wheelhouse. But how did you become the good music doc guy? Is there a quick answer to that one?
I don't know if there's a quick answer, and it's something that I asked myself that, because I started in radio. I worked for MTV. I did some work for Spotify. I got into it because of music. I wasn't a radio guy. I was a music guy that realized if I couldn't play, wouldn't it be great to play music for people and tell their stories? And when I found, after doing a bunch of music supervision on a lot of films and working with some amazing people, I found that I met Frank Marshall, who's one of the best people. He's one of the best human beings on the planet. He's a fantastic person and a good friend. And he had done so many other things, and I found out that his father was a professional musician who had played with Chet Baker and Frank Sinatra and a bunch of other people, and he loved music. So we talked about doing some music documentaries together. And again, that's sort of a continuation of the storytelling part of being, starting off as a DJ. So, and then we started with Sinatra, and talk about the degree of difficulty starting with, and that took several years, but that turned out great. And then we've done a whole bunch of them. I got a lot of things that I'm going to be announcing a new one actually, I think next week. So I'd love to tell you about it, but I can't get ahead of our.
You have to wait for the almighty deadline.com embargo thing, right?
Yeah, listen to you. You're exactly right. But it's a privilege to tell these stories. And I will say to you that, particularly after Laurel Canyon, I grew up in LA. I grew up around this scene. I was lucky enough to see a lot of these musicians and to get notes from a bunch of them after that came out, and just to say thank you for representing the moment as it was. Thank you for doing us right. It means everything to me. I mean, I didn't care about anything else. If you get a call, you get a letter from Bonnie Raitt or Bernie Ledden or Chris Hillman, Linda Ronstadt, people like that, and who feel that you did them right, then that's the reason to keep going and to keep telling these stories, because they're really trusting you with telling the story as it happened, and I think that we're very fortunate to do that.
Yeah, in the best of ways. I find, as a person who's also come from the publishing world, the music industry world, of clearing things from time to time, you learn over time, certain bands and legacies are like, you will never be able to clear anything. This is all you're going to get. And then there's other people where not only can you clear everything, but you know what all the pending projects are. For example, I love Kiss. I'm a big Kiss guy. There's no secrets in the Kiss world. Anytime there's a rumored project, they're going to talk about it, whether or not it happens. But I'm curious, as an LA person, if you've heard any rumblings of, say, a Van Halen documentary or a Van Halen comprehensive project, because them and AC/DC seem to be the two most tight-lipped bands out there ever.
I know that there is not anything pending on Van Halen at the moment. I think that, I don't know if you met Eddie over the years, but he was one of the most fantastic guys I had the pleasure to meet.
Him I never met. Roth I met, but unfortunately no Eddie. What can you do?
Incredibly generous, wonderful person. He gave instruments to Holland's Opus Foundation. He was very involved. He really did the walk, I'm telling you that. So I have a lot of love for that guy. And so no, there's nothing pending. I think the family's just still coming to grips with losing him, and so and of course AC/DC,
Yeah.
What do you say? I mean, who said that's an enigma rolled into a mystery or whatever it is.
Yes, exactly.
Saying is, it's like, but I think you made an important point, is that this business is about trust. And when an estate says, okay, you can make a film about my artist, they're really risking something like an Oliver Stone movie coming out, like The Doors, which was garbage. It was.
If you like fiction, it's great, but
I don't think any of the Doors recognized who that guy was, who was the singer, because he wasn't that guy. So I mean, I think the estates have gotten very sophisticated. They're going to let some people tell their stories. They're not going to let other people tell them. And it's a matter of respect, a matter of dealing properly with the music labels. Rhino was so helpful on Laurel Canyon in helping us in clearing the songs. I mean, we had over 100 famous songs in that. I mean, they weren't obscure. They were like really big songs. So we had to have a lot of cooperation. And I think at the end of the day, if somebody says, okay, you did a good job, that's all you can ask for, right? So you can continue telling people stories, because, I'm not in the business of gossip. That's not my business. I'm a music guy. I'm not a gossip guy,
Well said. And that is why you keep working and people want to work with you. Compliment accepted. Okay, cool. And the last question I got for you, Jeff, is, besides McCartney 321, what's a show or a movie that people should be checking out if they need a new thing to add to their their queue, their list, whatever the service is.
Can I tell you a book?
Please educate us.
I read an incredible book last month, and it's by a new writer. It's called The Final Revival of Opal and Nev. And I don't know if you've read that, but
I have not, but tell me more.
it is a marvelous, marvelous book about a British singer and American, a British musician, an American singer. It deals beautifully with relationships, with race, with loyalty, and the perspective is wonderful. It's so fresh. It's a music story, but it's a lot more, and that's what I always love the most about stories around musicians. Can you tell a story? It's sort of like if you and I looked at Walk the Line, and when we say, is that a music story or is that a love story?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can have it work on both levels, I think you have a much more chance of success. And this young woman who wrote this book wrote an incredible book. So I would really recommend to people to check her book out, Opal and Nev. And obviously, I'm trying to think of something I've seen recently. You mean a music project?
Anything in general. If you think it's great, I'll take the recommendation.
Well, of course, opening tomorrow is Questlove's masterpiece.
Also a Hulu joint, yes.
The Summer of Soul, and I'm not saying it because it's on Hulu, God bless them, but I'm saying it because it is fantastic. And it's a story that had to be told and should have been told a long time ago, and people will love it, and I hope they watch it.
Paltrocast.